I think for painters, the studio is, I think it's a medium-specific thing. I think there's people that look at their work more conceptual and more like they have a little fabrique going on, or like whatever you call a workshop. They have assistants running around, and so that's a different approach, I think. While painting as a social thing is kind of a, it's not even necessarily romantic, it's a lonely obsession more or less, you know. So you stay in the studio, and the studio is a little, I would always think it's a little like a teenage room, you know, like you close the door from the inside and your mother's not allowed to come in, and you actually do not necessarily do something special that is forbidden or taboo, but it's something you don't want others to see, I think. So, but in general, the studio is like, how you say, it's like the brain somehow. So like it inherits the history. There's different layers or different areas where there's your own history, the painting, the future, language, music, memories, moods. It's a place where you like can analyze very precisely, but you can also like drift into like whatever music.
When you look at the earliest paintings in the exhibition, we're in the mid-90s.
Mm-hmm.
And if you should, I didn't know you at the time, if you should give me a clue of what formed the person, Daniel, the painter Daniel Richter at that time, how did you become the early painter Daniel Richter? What was it? I don't want you to sit on the couch, but are there some elements in your biography, in your childhood, that you reflect today were more important than others for you becoming a painter?
There's different ways of establishing let's say a narration about the artist, or like a myth. I have to decide now which way I want to go. I could, like, let's sociological, I didn't have so much opportunities. I mean, one thing is, I had always had an interest in producing image, say that. I don't mean painting, I knew painting exists, but I've been in this underground, and I've been doing lots of sleeve designs for bands and flyers and posters for concerts and political whatever things. And so there's always been, and I've always been obsessed by images. I think I still am. Just now it's like, now I know most images, and there's not so much pleasure in, because it's very hard to find something really new, like in terms of like the production of images. If it doesn't matter if it's film or animation or photography or art photography or painting, that's the side effect of getting older. You know, been there, done that, seen that. But so I was quite old. You know, I was like 29. And let's embed the figure now. Like, you remember that, what is it? Malcolm McLaren established the name Sex Pistols. That's, I think, lesson 2 or 3 in the Rock and Roll Swindle. So established the name Daniel Richter. Part of it was, I had no money, I had no education, I had no high school degree, which limits your moves inside society quite strongly, because, and I had no driver's license, so I couldn't become a cab driver, for example. So, and I had this interest in, let's call it art, even though I didn't know what art was, but I also And then at some point, you know, like I was 29, I don't know, there was the unification of Germany, which I was not so fond of. And you see, I saw the wind of change blowing from the wrong direction, and I had to adjust. And I saw the projects that I was involved with, like, let's call it the autonome Projekt, like and that, I mean, people boil it down to the squatter movement, but it was not about that. It was more, let's see, another radical approach towards pragmatical criticism of capitalism. All that was easily understood would vanish. And I was quite old, and I had nothing. I mean, I had basically nothing. It's not a big drama. I didn't experience it like that. It's just like when I analyze it now, okay, there were not so much opportunities. I could draw. I was okay doing this kind of stuff. I knew the work of Albert Oehlen, Martin Kippenberger, and Werner Büttner, which is like, in my, let's say, in the scenery that I was in, which was more underground pop music, cultural theory orientated, some of the few artists I could understand, or I would say even say we could understand, because there was a certain mix of using language, images, relating to society, a certain, maybe even cynicism that, you know, like you could relate to, and that you could also not really put your finger on it, because it was on a level radical that didn't relate to any social scene, you know, like at least not that I knew. I mean, you knew also in Hamburg, where I was raised, more or less, that these people existed, and there was always like a flux between like people that were theoretics, journalists, artists, musicians. So at some point I thought, okay, I'm 29 now, I need to do something, and then I thought, okay, maybe. And another reason was like when you get state support when you study. I don't know if it still exists, but you get state support, so it meant you could like, democracy pays you to learn something that may even be of no value for democracy because it's art. But I thought, yeah, well, maybe if that's the opportunity, I'll try that. And then I took it very serious. It was not like, maybe because I was already quite old. So I started studying when I was 30, which is relatively old, I would think. I had to find out that what I wanted was to paint, because I thought it was the most, one thing is, it is the easiest thing to do. You know, like you just need a brain and a hand, and some paper and a brush or like canvas. And so it's easy, affordable. It has a heavy weight. It's a heavy weight on top of that, on the shoulders of it, because everybody knows painting. It's been around. It's been defined as the bourgeois art, or the art form of our society since ages. So that also is kind of a challenge. There is necessities and decisions that have to be made inside the painting. And they may mingle or like may be influenced by my mood. You know, whatever, phone call from the mother, she's sick, or whatever, reading the news, boy made 5 goals in soccer game. All these things are like, I wouldn't say superficial information, but they don't work into the work. So the mood is actually, it's not very interesting. You know, you get up and then you work, and work means you paint, you make decisions on the painting, then you stare at the painting stares back, and then you find a solution for the problems that you created. And it doesn't really matter how you feel about it, I think. It's just good to go on working. You establish certain habits because you feel safe. Not because you feel safe, because you are safe in what you do. You know certain, let's call it just tricks. You know certain tricks, you know? And at some point, the tricks are like leading your hand. It's like say you're a shoplifter, and then you can't go to a shop anymore without shoplifting. It's maybe not even in your interest. You just do it because you're used to do it, you do it, And then at some point you find yourself with all idiotic stuff that you stole. And you can't actually even use it. It's just like a habit you established. And the habit is like starting to figure you, like how you say, to shape you. And it's the same with painting. I was used to certain ideas of narration, and in these ideas of narration I went to different phases. And at some point I would say I was bored, or maybe I couldn't use it anymore, but I didn't know how to enter a new field. And then I thought about it. I thought the first thing is maybe to see if what can change is just change the tools. You say like, okay, I won't use brushes anymore, or I'll add certain elements to the color that I have never added before, just to see if that maybe forces my thinking to think in a different way. Because on a certain level, there's the way, let's say, there's a structure, a method inherited in the artist. And can you transform these ideas into something in a different way than before, and are they still valuable then? Or like, do they turn into fake, or just like, let's call it, it's like between style and method, you know? They are like brother and sister, but style is a danger, you know, like, because style at some point, and I don't mean it in terms of fashion, style was once a method that turned into a bad habit. And once you reach that, you have to question it. That's at least what I think. I mean, it was a surprise with the new work, with the last group of works, to finally get to a point where I thought it was kind of new for me, and maybe also for, like, in the small world of painting, maybe something that you could offer to the painters. But that was good, you know, like, because it's like learning, you could say it's like learning something you've not done before. It's like learning juggling or something. You can't juggle, then you learn to juggle, and then you have 3 balls, 4 balls, 5 balls, and then you're surprised you can even do maybe 6. And then you're like, yeah, you do that, and you just follow that, and then at some point you stop doing that. And then you start not juggling balls, but you juggle Coke bottles, whatever. I don't know.
We started this interview talking about the studio.
The studio.
And the studio is a working place, a place where you can shut out the world and you're here on your own. It's like you said, the teeny room that you can lock. But the world is right out here. The window is open, the world is outside there.
Yeah.
How does this here and this out there connect?
It's a problem with the metaphors when you tend to use metaphors. Like, let's say the studio is a sponge and the outside world is the water, and the studio gets squeezed by the big hand of experiences in the outside world. And so the studio is a sponge dipped into reality and then squeezed out. Yeah, that's a good metaphor. I mean, my work is obviously based on, as everybody's work, on it's influenced by the real world. And if it's not influenced by the real world, it's influenced by ideas about the real world. And then the next question is, what is actually the real world? I mean, what we know that's one of the first things we know is that we take everything that's out there for granted and for real, and it is. But once we learn about ourselves and society, we also learn that the reality of every relation between people is very different for people. You know, like how you say, a family functions or dysfunctions on a certain level that is from the outside just looking like, well, that's their reality. But when you talk to one brother and then you talk to the sister, they have a very different concept of their parents. So, and they're both talking about reality. I mean, that's the lowest level. You know, there are facts, and then there's reality. Yeah.
Are you a German painter?
I would think I am a German painter, even though I always try to not look like a German painter. I mean, in terms of not looking like the face, but the work. But I would have a hard time. When I was younger, I found it easier, but I'm sure there is a certain attitude towards painting, or let's say to art in general, which is in a post-Second World War situation very special, because it is like this conflict between, on one hand, narration, and on the other hand, abstraction, and then there is this, I think the factor that art has to be relevant and that painting has to also criticize itself. I think it was always an aim to use painting as something that is not an esoteric debate, but something that is extremely influenced by reality. And in the 90s, when I had two problems. I had to cope up with the history of, let's say, abstract painting. And I was interested in the radicalism of abstraction as a historical thing. I mean, that it got lame and established in kind of an esoteric wall decoration, but there's a certain promise in non-representation. There's a certain freedom that I was interested in. And so I wanted to kind of try to revive that for myself, to try to understand that. And the other thing was that in the 90s, it was very turbulent, you know, like, because like the Cold War ended, and I think now that's history, but like when I experienced it, it was really that like all kind of like classical boundaries, enemies, the so-called class conflict, all that changed. There was this, you remember there was also like this theory of, which I thought it was always bullshit, like the end of history, you know, like as thinking that the end of history is defined by capitalism that is now everywhere. And as we see now, capitalism is on different levels everywhere, but it is in a conflict with different levels of capitalism, or non-capitalist, but like oligarchic or traditional or religious structures that are also influenced by capitalism, but transform it into something that is, let's say, anti-Western. And so I saw all these like conflicts, and also it was something that was also new was the internet and digital information, which like slowly rose up, and it was also the whole talk about the amount of information that you have to understand while it's generated, like how to read information. So that was another thing that was very important for me, in terms of that I just try to bring as much information into a painting as possible, which was on a very simple level a way of coping with realities. It's just like, okay. Also was against the tradition that I knew, because like in painting you always hear like you have to reduce and you have to like don't do too much. And then the logical question is, what actually is too much? So how much, and then the next question is, how much can I do on a painting? So I try to do a lot of paintings where just like a lot of things are happening that are contradictory, because that was how I saw the situation is. Very contradictory, there's lots of information. There's also lots of pleasure in that, and there's lots of different, let's say, languages or fragments of languages and schemes and things that I was interested in to depict. And when I changed towards narration, it was also like an urge of doing something that had to do on a very simple level with reality. You know, like where I thought, okay, I'd like to, I felt the desire to paint things that related to what I saw in the world, and I, not in terms of like pointing a finger and giving lectures, but also in terms of my own, I don't know, insecurity or fear or paranoia or whatever it is. You know, like it's. The thing is, it's like, one thing is to say, I choose a certain topic, but naturally you also are like the person, and only when you do the work, you find out actually what person you were when you did that work. It's as if you don't try to keep a distance. As long as you try to keep a distance and take painting as kind of a lecturing thing. Hello, there is racism here, or there's certain topics there regarding the NSA, and then you do work about that. That's like lecturing. That's using painting as, let's say, education or whatever, like preaching to the converted. But the moment you take something that also has like a human effect on you, and you don't know how to describe it, you have to also like transform, the whole thing transforms into something that is not also about the topic, but also about you, I would say, which is necessarily interesting, not necessarily interesting.
It seems that in our time span, I mean, it has been historic times we have been living in. I mean, you grew up in a divided Germany, you've experienced reunification in all the 90s, and now kind of, especially in those days, you kind of have the feeling that the world is
things are falling apart. Things are falling apart. Yeah, I mean, what we have mainly experienced in the 20th century was, with the decline of the Soviet Union, that, let's say, the official discourse that held the world together was quite rational. And that quality of that discourse, which was, let's say, a discourse of the ruled versus the rulers, or the rich versus the poor, or the owners versus the non-owners. But it was like something that was rational, because it was a debate about which society generates the better life for all, and what is rational and reasonable, and what does a democracy, freedom, and etc. mean? Does it just mean consumerism, or does it mean a life in peace and happiness and productivity, whatever, you know, like all these. But that all, since these two blocks crumbled, we are like in a situation where, as we know, like rationality and the comeback of religions and the comeback of nations and the comeback of the great ideas and the great man with the great analysis and the great stupidity is like in full effect. I don't know. Maybe it was, supposedly it was necessary, you know, but I think what's happening now is highly unnecessary. It's not for the good of mankind, but everybody knows, so I'm not like, we're all saying, everybody nods their head and say, this can't go on, this won't end well.
But especially in Germany, we have an expectations to our intellectuals.
What German intellectuals? You mean like that one old wise man Habermas? I mean, I don't know, like that's a different topic. The intellectual debate in Germany, I don't know. There's a problem, like most people that know everything are idiots. Because you cannot be not an idiot if you think that you have to say something about everything, which puts me also in a weird place, you know. But I don't know, I distrust authorities, and I most of these guys I just distrust. Maybe it's good that none of those exist here. We don't have a Bernard Levy, we don't have a Lanzmann, we don't have an Oebeck, which is extremely boring. The debate is extremely, it's like left and right are like left, right, and middle are like this clumpy much. You know, there is actually no, and I can only hope for the better, for the rest of the world and for the Germans, that it stays as boring as that forever. Because if it doesn't stay boring, you know the Germans, you know German history. You never know what's like lurking behind the wall, you know, and the dynamic that can be certain. I mean, it's a very different topic, but look at the power that a ridiculous movement that was just defending the right to be full of ressentiments and anger and absolutely highly irrational, like the Pegida movement in Dresden, what kind of power these idiots generated in the public and in the mainstream. And now imagine these people as the voice of the silent masses in relation to something that was a real attack in Germany. You have something where you just like, no, just like, you don't want that. I don't want that. I don't need that. I don't want that. Germany must stay boring. Artists in Germany, the role of the artist in Germany is like to be an eccentric radical, because that's the only thing that the Germans can accept. In the pop music, we don't have that. You don't have that accepted in the German society. There's the few people that are eccentric or radical are very few, and they are like still more or less underground figures. Or they are like high-end figures. You can be that in the art world, and you can be that in the opera and composition, in maybe free jazz, but you cannot be that as a German. You cannot imagine, it's a very simple saying, but you cannot imagine a German David Bowie.
So, painting is a highly egocentric thing. We cannot, as a society, find comfort in your images, or...
Societies don't find comfort, individuals find comfort. I find comfort in music and in art and in literature, and I think most people do when they do that, but I don't know, societies find maybe comfort in when the soccer team wins. That may be, but that's not on my, I don't care about that shit. I don't want to be part of it. I mean, it's not my thing. I think it's painting, or like art in general, has to offer something. It's like a promise of a life unlived somehow, you know, to keep it very romantic. And that may speak to some, and it may not speak to others. But it's something that society has to defend, because it's actually like it's a utopian goal, and which is good, not good, necessary and reasonable and good for mankind, because life cannot be just about reproduction and buying cars.